Hi everybody, this is Matthew Poes with Poes Acoustics, and I'm answering questions. So this guy, K for Constant, paid $5, thank you, has actually asked a bunch of questions. I have 3 here that my wife has given me. She prints these out for me, and it looks like 2 of them are the same, so I'm going to go through 2. They're not the same question, but since he asked both, we'll just answer them together. So the first one says, for in-ceiling subwoofers, does it matter if they're down firing or in a side firing with a port? Related, to Welty's studies on subwoofer placement, have 4 subwoofers a quarter length in room. So related to Welty's studies on subwoofer placement having 4 subwoofers at the quarter length in the room, can this be mixed with 2 front corner loaded speakers and 2 in the ceiling? Concerned that bass waves interacting perpendicularly would be less or not effective. Okay. So first question, I am not 100% sure what is meant by how do they refer to it as side firing with a port if it's in a ceiling. So let's just say you created if it's in ceiling, like the subwoofer is in ceiling, then if you put the subwoofer up into the ceiling, it can't fire sideways because it would be firing into your attic space or your area between floors. So there has to be some way that it radiates down. But more importantly, subwoofers don't have a radiation direction to them. They're omnidirectional radiators. So it doesn't, whether it's ported or sealed, especially once it's put into a room which acts like a waveguide, the subwoofer is effectively a spherical radiator. It doesn't have to be. There are ways to make subwoofers that don't do that, but those are extremely rare and uncommon. So the vast majority of subwoofers that you use are like spherical radiators. Now, when you place them into an in-wall situation, you actually change them to a hemispherical radiator. So these hemispherical radiators, what that means is there isn't radiation happening behind the subwoofer anymore because the wall is blocking that. It's acting, again, kind of like a waveguide and forcing all the sound to radiate out from the wall, but you're still getting 180 degrees of radiation, which is not 360, which is what you normally get with a subwoofer. And obviously, when you push a subwoofer that's in the room to a wall, while the subwoofer itself is radiating sound all around, once it hits the wall, it's going to bounce right back. Yes, some of it penetrates through, but that's not important. So in terms of your question, if somebody was to make an in-ceiling subwoofer, it doesn't. Now, I guess this is the other possibility. Let's just say you make a ported subwoofer and you mount it into the ceiling, pointing down, and then you have another subwoofer on this wall, but it's all the way up to the corner of the wall. So one is in the corner of the room pointed down, and the other one is in the wall pointed sideways. If that's the question you're asking, same issue. They don't really have a radiation direction to them. Both of them effectively radiate the same. And those 2 positions are effectively equivalent to each other. They don't really differ. So it doesn't matter if it's in the wall or the ceiling, if it's in the corner like that. And it could be in, any wall for that matter. So going back to the Welty stuff, there's a mention of the quarter and then also corners, and that doesn't quite jive. So I just want to clarify. Quarter wavelength means, I'm sorry, not quarter wavelength, quarter placement means you take a room wall width, move in 1/4 from each side, take the length of the room, move in 1/4 of the length and place a subwoofer there. That's that quarter placement idea. And it's hard to do that in a room on the floors, but you can do it in the ceiling. You could do it in the room too. If you did that, let's say for 2 of them, and then you wanted to put 2 more in corners, the results would best be described as unpredictable. Welty's program, because I just talked to him about this recently, could in theory be used to simulate that. So you could, I don't think that's publicly available, but like he could simulate that. It is possible to simulate those results, and you could see if a result like that could yield good results. Remember that the whole idea behind this had nothing to do with good sound at one seat. The idea behind this was, without using bass traps in a room, how can you get to a point where you get more consistent and even bass that's optimized at not just this seat, which the one I'm sitting in right now is my reference seated position, and make it good at the left seat to me, the right seat to me, and that back row of seats. And so what they found was that by placing the subwoofers in particular locations, the ways in which those subwoofers would energize the modes could be done in such a way that creates greater consistency. The quarter positions happens to work by not exciting certain modes. If you do it both the width and the length, you're not exciting a certain width mode and not all of them, but a certain width mode and a certain length mode. And that reduces some of the modal interactions that happen, meaning that anywhere in the room you go, you're going to have better sound because you didn't excite all the modes. So that can be a good thing to do, but there's other factors you need to consider. It's not just about the smoothness and evenness, and you may get better smoothness and evenness in different seated positions for other reasons. So the other placements can still do that, but there's also output. So one of the problems with placing the subwoofers out from the walls like that is that you introduce SBIR effects. So what that means is that there's some additional peaks and nulls that happen as a result of the bass radiating out of the subwoofer behind it, up to the front wall and back and interacting, also to the side wall. So if you place it in a corner, you don't have any of those SBIR effects. So that's a problem that can come up. It's not modal related, and you've now introduced that by moving it. So I've never actually liked that position for that reason. And then you've got another one, which is you no longer get all the boundary reinforcement. So if you place a speaker on the floor, you get reinforcement from the floor. But if it's not up against the walls, you're not getting any reinforcement from the walls. If you place it in the corners, the tri-corners as it's referred to, you get reinforcement from either the ceiling or the floor and the left wall or right wall and the front wall or back wall, depending on where the sub is. And so corner placement gives you the most boost, if you will, in output. Now, if your subwoofers are like overkill, they're way more than you need, and you really have way, way more output than are needed, and you're having issues with response consistency, placing them into those quarter placements can be a good idea. If you don't, you may find that you get better results or equal results in certain parameters with better results in others. So again, like the evenness may be close or just as good with other positioning, but you get extra bass output. So if you look at that paper carefully, a lot of people drew like, oh, the quarter placement was really good. I think because it was consistent with an old way of doing things. But actually, corner placement and the midpoint placements were the two that really were the shining stars, if you will. Partly because they're convenient. They work really well in most systems. You can hide the subwoofers more easily in those positions, but also because the corner placement gave you the most output, with the midpoint being the next most. And they also both gave really good results in terms of evenness. So the response was very consistent seat to seat. Now remember, if you only have one seat, Todd reminded me of this. He says, people will ask him all the time, which do you recommend? This placement, or this placement? And they go through a whole conversation about it. And then they point out, well, I only have one seat that I care about, or I only have one seat, period. Well, guess what? This approach wasn't for you. That is not what you should be doing. You should be doing the subcrawl. So the subcrawl is the idea of finding the optimal placement for your subwoofer that gives you the best response in this one seat, and that's it. In fact, you'd probably be better off, just depending on what you're trying to do, just having a stack of subwoofers in that one perfect location for the one seat to be optimized. The only reason that I tend to still do some of the other location approaches with the one seat being optimized is that sometimes it's hard to find that one position that's a practical position that doesn't have any sort of cancellation modes or modal issues right in the seat. So I've had situations before where the best placement for the subwoofer is so inconvenient, like it's like a door or something like that. Like I just can't put it there. And so then you put it in the places you can, and none of them are good in the one seat. Like that one seat always has some sort of a dip in it that I can't get rid of. So then what happens is if I can spread two of them out to two locations, I can optimize them in such a way that I get rid of that one peak there. So I do sometimes change things up for that. Okay, next question, moving on. K for Constant asked, was sound damping between rooms? Are outlets in the wall important to treat since air can pass through them? If so, then what are some strategies to treat this? And the answer is yes. I've actually covered this before, I think, in some of my videos. So when you speak of sound damping, keep in mind that this is actually sound isolation, really. So when the sound passes through the outlets in a sound isolated wall, the outlet itself, what happens is you've got a little bit of a rim between the drywall material and the outlet, the box that the outlet goes into, and then sound can penetrate around that outlet through, there's insulation, but it's not going to stop much, and then to the wall on the other side. So that becomes a weak point. And sometimes, because you want outlets on both sides of the wall, they actually place the outlets back to back. So now sound can go like right through, and it's a pretty significant weak point. There's a cover, but the covers are almost always plastic, so they like offer very little. So here's what I do. The first thing I do is I try to caulk all that, and I try to prevent that from happening. So if I can do it during the construction phase, what you can do is use a double gang box, and then you use a double to single adapter that's designed to space the outlet out enough for the thickness of the drywall, because remember, we're usually using 2 layers of drywall. Or if I can even move the box backs and still use that with a single layer of drywall. But almost always we've got 2 layers, and so this is a good way to go. You can then put caulk around the landing area around the spacer, and then when the drywall goes in, that seals it up. Then it doesn't matter what kind of gap there is because it's all sealed up. If I can't do that for some reason, then we just caulk it once the drywall goes in. But basically fill that gap one way or the other. The outlet box itself gets a putty pad around it. So these putty pads are basically these relatively high mass clay pads that are used traditionally for fire stopping and weatherizing of these systems to help reduce air from getting around and leaking. And then for fires, it reduces smoke transfer and fire transfer through those little gaps. So it also, because it's pretty high mass, they're pretty heavy, and they're sticky, and you can seal everything up, it does a really good job of stopping sound from going through. But then there's another step, and this other step is something that can be retrofitted if you didn't do any of the other things I told you. The caulking thing you can still do, so I still recommend it, but let's just say you've done the caulking and you still have some concerns, because again, maybe you didn't putty pad the outlet. So the cheapest solution is there's these little foam things that are used for weather purposes to help add insulation that go behind the outlet. You can put those up. But there's a company, I think it's called like Andes or something like that. I don't remember. I should try to find the link. But what you're going to look for is a water gasket, like a waterproof gasket that's used for outlets that go outside. And I found one in particular that I really like because it's a heavier material, much heavier than foam. And so it's going to do a better job stopping sound. Now, if you really are concerned, an aluminum or steel cover, or outlet cover, is probably a better cover to use for this. And then what you do is you trim that gasket because it's going to come a little bit too big. So you take the gasket, you put it on a cutting board of some kind, you put the outlet cover on top of it, and then you cut it with like an X-Acto knife to be the right shape. And then you go over to your wall and you put it in and you screw it in, and that's going to seal up better. It's not perfect, but it's going to reduce the size of the opening, add a little extra mass and damping. So I do that as just a routine because I think the cost of those are like $2 or $3 a piece. It's like next to nothing. The labor is not all that great to do it. So in any job where I'm hands-on, at least, I'll do that. If I can get a client to do it, I'll try to do that, and I recommend it. And certainly you guys watching this video can take that with you as well. So yes, it absolutely is a concern. It can be a leak. As a little anecdote of like how serious this can be, there's a known phenomenon with these sound leaks where the effect that it has on the actual STC rating of the wall is negligible. So if you didn't treat any of the outlets on a wall and you did a lab measurement with like 4 or 5 of these untreated outlets and switches and everything, these openings basically, you might lose a point. That's it. It's like really minor. But actually, if you were to stand on the other side of the wall and hear somebody blocking those openings versus not, what you hear might be more significant than that. And there's a reason for that, which is that we can hear well below the noise floor of a room when the sound is different and distinct from the noise floor. So one of the problems with that test is it's just a pink noise test, basically, where you're running pink noise or white noise. You're just running this noise through it, and it's how much does it stop. So you'd only let a little bit through. But when what's being let through is something like voices in a movie talking, and what you hear in the background of the other adjacent room is just background noise, like HVAC noise, so kind of like white noise, then those voices are actually quite audible, even though they're very, very low in level, and they may not even be as loud as the background noise. What's being let through may be quieter could even be 10 dB of the background noise, but it's not masked in any way. So you're still perceiving it, and it's kind of annoying. So I've had rooms, this happened here. So the contractor didn't do a stupendous job with sealing everything up. They didn't caulk things. They didn't cut the drywall really well when they were cutting around things. There was a lot of gaps. A lot of things that were supposed to be done in a certain way didn't really get done. And my knee-jerk reaction was like, we had so much to do to get the house ready, and I wanted to get the room up and running, that I'm like, maybe we just leave it and don't worry about it. So I didn't seal up a lot of these things thinking, well, maybe it's not a big deal. Like I've always made a big deal about it in projects in the past, but maybe it's not. I've never tried it without doing this. And I did some testing of that wall behind me. And what I did was I did an array of microphones on this side. I moved the microphones to the other side. I ran a sweep through it. It's a better way of doing it because the signal to noise ratio is much higher. And the STC rating was it was actually a good bit below what it needed to be. And so I looked at the spectral balance of what was coming through, and there was actually some like little peaks in certain areas. It was kind of weird. Like there was like I was basically getting a poor STC score from like really particular areas where there was a lot of sound coming through. The other thing was that you'd like watch like a movie in here. I think I didn't have the system fully set up yet, so it might have been that I was playing music or something like that, and like my wife would be in the office and she could like clearly hear. It was quiet, but she could clearly hear what was being said, and I'm like, man, like I'm supposed to know what I'm doing, and I really failed at this. So I did some listening. I basically put on music and voices and things like that on some speakers that were playing in here. And then I went over there and I listened with a stethoscope that you replace the end of the stethoscope with a little metal tube. And I'm putting it all around things. And every time I got near an outlet, or like one of the really bad ones ended up being the HVAC controller, they put in a metal ring with no box around it and then cut the opening really badly. And then when they put the HVAC control system on that, there was actually big gaps. And you could like, I could reach my hand into the wall. I didn't even realize they'd done that until I took it off. And then there was an issue in the HVAC closet, which is on in this back corner over here. The other side of that corner is where the HVAC system is, and it all runs through here too. So there was some stuff there that they didn't do right that was causing leaks that I hadn't seen until I got into it. So like I went through and I'm hearing, I'm like, oh man, there's a leak there. And a lot of it was the outlets. There's a ton of outlets in there because it's an office. So we had them put in extra outlets for like network cables, for power, we didn't do telephone, I guess, but like other stuff like that. So there's like a lot of, I think there's like 2 quad outlets plus I think it's like 4 or 5 network cables just on that one wall there alone. And the same thing's repeated on the other side. So like I said, we're checking in like, oh man, this is bad. And so then I'm like, well, you know what? We're just going to go back to what we know to do. They did do the putty pads, but they didn't do anything else. And so all those other leaks were there. So then I went in and I caulked everything carefully. Where there were some bigger gaps, I used spray foam. It's not my preferred, but sometimes there's nothing else you can do. So like with that HVAC control, what I did was I did spray foam to build up the area. And then once I had something that I could build it up on, I took the putty pad and I took a putty pad and put it in there and covered it, which added a good seal and some mass to it. And then around the gap, there was like a little gap still left where the ring went in. I put some caulk there. And then I put a foam backing on the HVAC control itself and then put that up on the wall. With the outlets, I did the caulking like I said. And then on the outlet cover itself, I changed them out with metal covers. And I put the waterproof gaskets behind it, and I put those on and screwed them in. The metal has the advantage over the plastic of it doesn't bend, so it puts more pressure on the gaskets. I'm sure my wife will tell you, you can see I didn't trim the gasket too much because I wanted to get a really good seal, so you can actually see the gasket around the edge a little tiny bit. There's like a little bit of a black material there. But I went and retested it, and the STC rating went from, I think the first time I did it, it was around 59. This is a double stud wall. The drywall didn't get done quite the way it was supposed to. It was supposed to be 5/8, 2 layers of 5/8 on both sides. And what they did was 2 layers of 5/8 on this side and 2 layers of 1/2 inch lightweight on the other side. Not the end of the world, but it's not as good as it could have been then. And there's like a pretty sizable air gap because it needed to have the ability to handle 2 9-inch subwoofers that were going 9-inch deep subwoofers that were going into the wall. And so it's like 9.5, 10 inches of air gap. So like with all that air gap and everything, it's like you'd expect more than high 50s. In fact, if you believe some of the people online, it should be in the 70s. I will just say that's an unusually high number that for a double stud wall. Realistically, 65 to 70 is a more realistic value for the kind of wall I built. And then this is in situ too. So there's always going to be some variation from lab. I sealed everything up and I hit 62. And then when I fixed the problem with the HVAC system and a couple other things, I think I ended up hitting 63. For an in situ number, again, I think this wall realistically is probably an STC 65 to 67. Hitting 62, 63 in real life is pretty good, actually. That's, I mean, compared to what I've seen elsewhere. So the subjective improvement, though, was that you could no longer clearly hear things like you could before. And I then had to turn things up way louder for my wife to hear it. Now, sometimes I'll listen to music. Gene will tell you I listen to music way too loud, apparently. So pretty loud. And she will recognize the song from the beat. So she can't really hear the words that well at all. And mostly what you're hearing is just a bass beat in the background. And it's very, very faint. That office is very quiet. So it's very, very faint. But it's enough that she'll text me and be like, I love that song. And every time she does it, I'm like, crap, the sound isolation isn't working. But it's not really true. It is working. It's just that if an office noise floor is, let's say, somewhere around NCB 15, and you've got music playing through there, and the music is in this room, for like an argument, it's 85 dB, and we've dropped it down to like 20 dB, that's going to be readily audible in the other room, even though we dropped it so significantly so that it's only 20 dB. Like if we dropped it down, let's say 60 dB from what it was, and it went from 80 dB then to, 25 dB, that's a huge improvement to go from 85 to 25. That's a massive amount of reduction, but like I said, that would be audible. And if you actually dropped it more than that, it's still going to be audible. Like I said, you can hear noise below the noise floor. So even if I had 80 dB of reduction and it was 85 and it's only 5 dB, that still might be audible. And that's not exactly how STC curves work. So remember that a STC 65 wall isn't knocking it down 65 dB. That's at 500 hertz. Above that, it should actually increase, and so you should see more than that much reduction. But below that, it's quite a bit lower. In the bass, you can have very, very little reduction. So you might only have like 15 or 20 dB of reduction in the bass. I have more than that, but like again, if I'm playing my music at about 85 dB, the bass is probably actually like 90 plus. And if I only have, let's say, even 50 dB of blocking, that's 40 dB of bass on the other side. That's quite loud. Most people in a very quiet room would readily hear that as a booming bass beat. Not like, oh my God, that's loud booming bass beat, but like you'll hear it for sure. All right, so yeah, sound dampening, sound isolation, really the correct word for what we're talking about here of those outlets is a critical thing in most rooms. So hopefully this is helpful. Enjoy the video and subscribe. These donations are really helpful. I appreciate that. So keep it up, guys. Thank you.